Welcome to Fourth and One. I'm Todd Palmer, joined by Nick Jacobs here as we hit the vacation period of the NFL calendar. This is a time when players, coaches, well, maybe not coaches, but players and a lot of the staff get away. It's one of the few times in the NFL calendar where NFL personnel can get away. It's that awkward period between OTAs and training camp where there's just not a lot going on. Nick, glad to see you're back from your 2-day vacation, and you could join us.
I feel a little jab there. What's the matter? Hey, I didn't hold it over your head when you went to San Diego last year.
In
all fairness, I had my wrist injury at the time too.
I know you were so torn up when I left town that you hurt yourself.
Yeah.
That was my reward for being laid off. That was I did that with my severance money. So yay! I'm angling. I'm hoping to get another. If I get laid off again, then I'll go to maybe Hawaii this time. I'm hoping for a better severance package.
So I heard we got a podcast, right?
Well, we do. And in honor of your birthday, we're going to talk about a topic that
not my birthday,
that you
right
love,
now, Todd.
Well, it's funny though, since you brought up your birthday, Nick.
You're the one who brought it up.
I wanted to wish you happy birthday. For those who don't know, Nick Jacob turned 29 again.
I don't have an S at the end of my last name.
Nick Jacobs turned 29 again on Friday.
Yeah.
I don't know why you insist on derailing the podcast here. I'm trying to be professional and hold it together, and I just feel like you're baiting me at this point.
Okay.
But no, Nick. In all seriousness, happy birthday!
Thank you for not revealing my real age, so the hackers don't know.
Yeah. Well, presumably they know you're at least 29. So
that's fine. They can think whatever they want, but you can't let the hackers know the true story. You got to guard it.
All right.
Like a password.
Or your copy of The Bodyguard on DVD.
Yes. How did you know?
Because we talked about it during a previous take. That is lost forever in the vault of that's deleted somewhere. But in all seriousness, though, it is kind of an odd time in the calendar. I mean, we're through OTAs, and obviously everything that came before that. And we're through the mandatory minicamp and everything that comes with that. And so now it is just kind of right now, it's just a wait and see. I mean, there's not a lot of news that happens during this window. I mean, it's possible. Maybe we'll hear something about Tyreek Hill's status, because he's still suspended from the team. I expect at some point that's going to be addressed before training camp starts. But other than that, no real news expected until camp starts, right, Nick?
That is correct, sir.
So that's why we call it the vacation period of the NFL calendar.
Yep.
This is also the time when most NFL beat writers go away, which is another reason you don't ever see breaking news this time of year, unless there are some rare exceptions, and one of them happened a couple years ago.
2 years ago, about this time,
when John Dorsey was let go at a time, and I cannot stress this enough.
They parted ways.
Yeah, I cannot stress this enough. The timing of when John Dorsey was sent packing by the Chiefs,
they parted ways,
was insanely crazy. I mean, like nobody saw it coming. Like personnel people. Well, I'm saying the timing of it. Personnel people across the NFL were just shocked that they would do it in June, right as the vacation period is starting. I mean, literally, Terez Paylor, who was still on the Chiefs beat, now he's of course senior NFL writer for Yahoo, but he was still on the Chiefs beat. He was literally on his vacation when it happened. I mean, so it was a time that nobody expects big breaking stories like that to happen. But obviously it did, and you think it's for the better, right?
Yeah, long term, yes. I think it was the ideal time for them to go in separate directions, and I actually won a bet with Leif Leisig on that one. We had a bet before we both left.
I think it's Leif. I saw the behind the music.
It's Leif Leisig. Thank you. And I hope Leif is listening right now because I won a bet that I still haven't collected on right now.
Oh, what does he owe you? $50?
No, Q39, I think is what we made. We made the bet, if I remember correctly.
I think with interest, it has to be Q39 for 2.
I mean, I know you're trying to hustle your way into free food, but that's not going to happen. No, Leif and I had a bet to where I didn't think Dorsey was going to be general manager before the season started that year in 2017, and Leaf had it that he would be.
Yeah, well, take that, Leaf, and you better pay up. Nobody likes a Welch, man. Well, next Sunday.
In all fairness, I think Leaf beat me on the Todd Haley one, though, whenever we were betting on that one, too. When Todd Haley would be relieved of his duties.
Oh, so
I think he won that. I'm pretty sure Leaf won that one.
Oh, did you guys have like I'm assuming that one was like a baby pool type situation where you had to, pay $1 for each day because everybody knew he was getting canned after the 2011 season.
Oh,
right?
no, this was before the season even started.
Oh, okay.
No, Leaf and I do ours well in advance.
Okay, so Leaf was saying he would make it through the season, and you were saying he'll be fired mid-season then?
I can't remember what it was. I know Leaf ended up winning, but we had a certain time period we thought it was going to happen.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Leaf won that one.
All right. Well, okay.
I thought it was going to happen in week 6 and it ended up being like week 12. I think that's what it was. I think Leaf ended up beating me out of that one.
So how long will Brett Veach be GM of the Chiefs?
I'm hoping for quite a while because he's he's a very talented general manager. A lot more than I think people realize in that regard.
All right. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about
do like a little audit.
We're going to talk about for this edition of the podcast as we head into a little vacation time here. Look, obviously, when John Dorsey came in, the Chiefs franchise had bottomed out in a lot of ways. And so I do think that Dorsey deserves, Dorsey and/or Andy Reid deserve some credit, some respect for the job they did turning things around. But we're also going to look at kind of breaking down the roster situations, the salary cap situations, and the overall health of the franchise with respect to when Dorsey came in, when Dorsey left, and then ultimately where they are today. So that's why I wanted to. It's important, I think, to start out. You got to remember the Chiefs were 2-14 after the 2012 season, coming off of having finished dead last in the AFC West 4 of the last 5 years. They had that one weird year
2010
where somehow
Charlie
under
Weiss and
Castle,
Romeo.
they made it to
Charlie Weiss was the big reason why that happened.
But somehow they made it to the playoffs. Got waxed by the Baltimore Ravens in that playoff game, by the way, at home at Arrowhead.
Yeah, I think that was like 37, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Jamal Charles had the touchdown where I thought they had a shot, and then
literally like
never worked out.
first series, Jamal busts a big one, and then I think the next series, Matt Castle couldn't identify Will Demps in a pretty standard cover 2 and threw it right to him, and everything was kind of academic from there.
Well, it was the 4th down play when they tried to get cute and they tried something with Jamal. That was kind of the turning point in the game. And after that, it was pretty much over from that point. But yes, you are right.
So I mean, like I said, look, I call that a dark period in the NFL or in terms of the Chiefs franchise history because you also got to remember that was also, the Javon Belcher stuff, this is all in that era. Scott Pioli and his craziness. You're still fresh coming out of the Todd Haley, whatever that was, where he, turned into the Unabomber, and, had his paranoia had kind of taken over. If you remember the famous article Kent Babb did about, how he thought the phones were bugged and everything like that. But on the field, the product was a mess too. They scored, in the 2012 season, they had 9 rushing touchdowns and 8 passing touchdowns. For the season, they had 17 total touchdowns on offense that year. That's a good month for Patrick Mahomes now. So I just want to make sure people understand. Tony Miyake was the second leading receiver on that team behind Dwayne Bowe with 453 yards. This was not a good era of Chiefs football.
It was not a fun time to cover the football team, and I enjoyed whenever a new era began with Andy Reid and John Dorsey and what they were able to put together from the start there. To kind of move on to that in 2013, I think the biggest thing they had to do was they had to figure out a way to change the culture and to be able to put a lot of leadership in that locker room that was going to change the tide, that knew how to work, knew how to be professional, knew how to win, and we're going to do all those things to wins. And you needed guys who could help implement Andy Reid's system on offense. You need guys on defense that you thought could execute and run Bob Sutton's scheme at that time. So anybody who had the connection to the Rex Ryan, Mike Pettin era, you wanted to try to see if you get some of those guys in there, and that's how you got DeVito. And then you had a lot of athletic players coming in their prime with Tamba Hali, Brandon Flowers, Derek Johnson, Dontari Poe, Alan Bailey. And then you had Eric Berry, obviously, and I mean, you had a handful of guys that were able to that were already inherited on this football team that got to have some pretty good years with the direction that the organization went with Dorsey and Reed.
So, what do you think Dorsey and Reed got right in those early years, and then where do you think it ultimately went wrong in your, as far as why the Chiefs had to get rid of him, 4 years later?
I think in terms of what they got right is the quarterback position. That was the biggest thing that they were able to stabilize. Andy knew what he wanted in a quarterback, and I remember we had when I was working on a previous station, we'd done an interview with him about what characteristics he wanted in a quarterback, and he described a lot of the things that both Alex and Patrick Mahomes both are, and Dorsey and him were able to go get that at the combine whenever they were speaking with the 49ers, and they were able to get Alex Smith and able to make that trade for him. And, it was a valuable second-round pick that year because they were, the first picking in 2013 because of how bad they were. But they stabilized the most important position because having Matt Castle at that spot, it wasn't working out for him. And then they had Kyle Orton, and then Brady Quinn came in for a little bit, and before that, you had Damon Heward, Brody Croyle, Trent Green,
Tyler Thigpen.
I mean, and and the list went on, and you didn't have the stable position at quarterback from 2005 until 2013.
Yeah, Damon Heward was in there too, right?
Yeah, I said it.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying like you didn't have. There wasn't a definitive guy that's the franchise like you view Patrick Mahomes now. They had it to where it was Alex Smith, and then it was Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
So Chase Daniel came in a time or two.
I mean, they did. They had Matt Castle. Matt Castle was earning I think year 5 of a $63 million contract, and that's one of the first things they did in March after getting Alex Smith was release Matt Castle. So, I would say that was an upgrade. I don't know about you. I was never personally a big Castle fan, and the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, and Pioli was, so that that's how that one went down.
That's how you get you finished dead last in the division 4 out of 5 years.
So, but I mean, in 2013, they had, in my opinion, they had a solid nucleus that was already built. They just needed to bring in a really key part of the foundation because you already had Jamal on offense, you had Dwayne Bowe, but you were really bare at receiver other than Dwayne Bowe, and then you needed stabilizing forces at quarterback. So then you were able to get that with Alex Smith and Chase Daniel. And then you had Tyler Bray, who you brought in at that point as well. So, I mean, you were able to stabilize that spot. Running back-wise, you obviously had Jamal. He was kind of your feature at that point in time. Receiver-wise, they ended up bringing in Donnie Avery and trading John Baldwin away for A.J. Jenkins. Tight end-wise, I remember Kelsey had the microfracture issue, so he didn't end up playing in 2013. But you did end up having Anthony Fasano and Sean McGrath, who were kind of the big parts of that.
Remember who else they signed? Demetrius Harris. That's when they signed Demetrius Harris.
No, I try to forget that part of it. That was one of Dorsey's pet projects. That couldn't. 5 years later, he's still.
Well, he'll get his chance in Cleveland.
He's still working.
Baker Mayfield's
working to become a complete player.
Baker Mayfield's going to make him a star.
And then offensive line wise, I knew they were going to have to make some. I knew over time they were going to phase some things out because I knew Eric Winston was going to be here because whenever he went on his media tour after Castle got hurt that day, and he claimed that fans were booing or cheering whenever Castle got hurt, and that went as viral as it did during that era before Twitter got big and before a lot of other things. You needed to kind of move on from that era in that regard, and you also didn't fit the scheme as well. And then you were long-term replacing Brandon Albert with Eric Fisher, and you had Rodney Hudson on the line, you had Jeff Allen, Donald Stevenson, and then you brought in Jeff Schwartz. So, I mean, they had a solid offensive line that first year for Alex Smith to keep them upright. So, from an offensive perspective, you were building a brand new system. You needed guys who either knew how to execute or had the skill set to get it done. So, in that regard, they were able to get that portion of it done.
All right, so I mean, I think we both agree that they did a good job. I mean, one of the strengths of John Dorsey was the way he was able to churn the roster at the end of training camp and get some guys in. And Spencer Ware was one of those guys they brought in after he got cut by Seattle and stuff like that. And they did a good job with trying to remake things. But was it a case of too much tinkering? Was it a case of not understanding the salary cap and when to when it was time to pay guys? Because Dorsey's one of the most maddening things about Dorsey, I think, was he would tend to pay guys for what they had done, and so you were locked into these big contracts when you were getting declining play or injury riddled years from guys, as opposed to signing, being able to identify guys early and get the contract to match the production on the field.
Well, with Dorsey early on in 2013, they had Pioli had left a significant amount of cap space, somewhere between 35 to 40 million, if I remember correctly, and they spent a lot of that on getting Anthony Fasano. They got Sean Smith, they got Chase Daniel, Donnie Avery, and I remember that day that was
Alex Smith cost a little bit more too.
Yeah, just that day, I remember they and Mike DeVito, and they brought in a handful of guys and signed them, early on, and they had a big presser where Alex Smith and all these guys were in the facility and we're interviewing all of them, and it was a big, exciting day. It rejuvenated the fan base. It rejuvenated that football team, and you knew that change was coming. And it was going to be for the better. And so, in that regard, they burned through a lot of capital that first year to change the culture. And then each year after that, in 14, 15, and 16, it felt like they were only, because of how much they'd spent, and they were only able to make a move here or there. So, they had to. They could add a player. They could add Macklin in 2015 like they did, but you weren't going to be able to add multiple guys who could help achieve the system because you'd spend a bunch of that money that first year and overpaid a little bit for some of them. So yeah, that was kind of the first thing. I think Dorsey, when he was trusting the evaluations of his cap guy, I think where you talk about to where they overspent at times. They waited till the final moments in a lot of areas to get some of the deals done and over evaluated in some regard instead of like they did with this one. They drafted Eric Fisher, and then he was going to be Brandon Albert's long-term replacement at a cheaper price, and that one was able to be effective. But Dee Ford, who they drafted, they still had to pay Tamba and Houston for multiple years because Dee Ford never became that player until this past year that they envisioned, and it became a 5-year project. So, from a drafting perspective, I felt like whenever Dorsey was building a football team, I felt like he built a team that was a year behind in what its weaknesses were. That that he was replacing the spots that had already happened, and there was going to be new spots popping up, and it honestly kind of felt like whack-a-mole to where he was a year behind schedule in terms of what could get them over the playoff hump.
Do you think he put enough trust in Chris Ballard during that time? Because obviously Chris Ballard was the guy he brought over as player personnel director, and we've seen what he's been able to do in Indianapolis. So was it a? I guess what was the cause of, because when you had Veach on the staff, Ballard on the staff. You had some guys who are very well respected guys who've gone on to become GMs in the league. Mm-hmm. So why didn't it work out?
I think from a draft perspective, when you're going through parts of that, their 2013 draft, how many of those guys are not in the league now?
Yeah, no.
And how many of them?
But in terms of because obviously John was a guy who had a pretty big ego. He was a football guy, took a lot of pride in that. I liked John. I personally liked John's personality. I got along with John fairly well in the times that we'd met with him. But I know it rubbed some people wrong in the building, the way that he approached things, right?
I know Therese Paylor kind of did an article about that whenever Dorsey was parted ways with the organization. John just kind of still had that football locker room mentality when he played, and I don't think he ever really got out of that. I think that just he kind of took that in, and he could do that as a scout. But I think whenever you're becoming the GM of an organization, I don't think it was something that was going to help you be effective as a general manager. Because as a general manager, you've got to talk with the fan base. You got to work with the fan base. You have to do some public appearances and stuff of that nature. You have to organize a football team. You got to know the capper. You got to have a cap guy who can keep you on point and keep you in good fare to where you're equal with the rest of the league, to where you don't overspend, but you pay the correct amount in that regard. And I think that's kind of one of the spots where it didn't work out for him. I think for me personally, and this is just speaking myself, I got rubbed the wrong way when that story came out that Ian Rappaport at NFL Network put out about the week of the Chiefs-Steelers playoff game. and it talked about how Dorsey's contract was going to be expiring in the next year or so, and how he may be eyeing Green Bay and stuff like that. And for that to come out the week of the playoffs, that didn't sit right with me whenever I saw that happen. I had a pretty good idea where that leak came from on that one. And I mean, that's fine that there was some leverage created in that regard, but it, for me personally, that didn't sit well with me. That that an individual may have put themselves above the focus of the team that week, because then players had to answer those questions, and people in the organization had to answer that question. I remember that it was asked multiple times at the press conference, and it should have been about the Chiefs Steelers, not necessarily that type of stuff.
Yeah. All right. Hey, real quick, we're going to take a break and we'll come back and we're going to move forward, talk a little bit about Veach and some of the differences that we see with the current regime. Welcome back to 4th and 1. I'm Todd Palmer, joined by Nick Jacobs. Hey, hope we didn't get you too depressed with the John Dorsey talk there, folks. And look, that is an era where the Chiefs, with Andy Reid, we're going to the playoffs a lot. Real quick, what's your favorite John Dorsey memory? Do you have one?
One of them I can't say. So that one I'll have to keep on the DL. But I get to live out a dream with him one day. That's all I'm going to say on that regard. So that was actually a fun day. It's
not safe for work?
No, it's not that. It's just it was a fun time. That's all I'm gonna say. And it wasn't anything that was terrible. It was like a dream come true.
So it wasn't like a Minnesota Vikings party boat situation.
No, it definitely wasn't that.
Okay.
When you're a football nerd and you get to talk football, like it was fun in that regard.
Yeah.
And get to learn about some things. So.
All right, nerd.
No, so I'm saying like I got to learn some stuff about how they drafted what they were strategy wise, and I enjoyed that, and getting to hear thoughts on stuff like that. That was actually kind of fun. More than kind of fun. It was a dream come true, and I still love it to this day. But
what was it? Was draft day an accurate depiction of it for you, like that behind the scenes look?
No, stop. I knew you want to bring the movie into it, but I think John did the best he could with the ability that he had, and I think he just didn't have the best cap guy, and I think he kind of waited on some things, and I think he got credit for some stuff that I don't think was all him. Ballard, I'm telling you, Ballard was underrated compared to what people will give that man credit for, and Veach was underrated too.
Hopefully people see that with what Chris Ballard's been able to do with that Indianapolis roster in short order. Now, granted, it helped that you got Andrew Luck coming back in the picture. That makes a difference.
Yeah, but he had to rebuild a lot of that football team that Ryan Grigson was awful at. He rebuilt that O-line in 1 year.
Just go look at who the reigning defensive rookie of the year is, and the response that people had when he drafted a linebacker out of South Carolina State, and people just universally ripped him for like reaching on it, and then he goes on to become one of the best players in the league.
Here's what I'm saying about Ballard, and this is part of his strategy, and we'll move on. And
I gotta get my Dorsey story too.
I know he used to mess with us up at training camp.
Ballard?
Media. No, Dorsey.
Okay.
Dorsey liked to mess with people
because Ballard well known for his hijinks.
Okay. So, Dorsey, whenever we'd be sitting up in the media tent at training camp, Dorsey would like to sneak up there and just sit behind all the media members and just take in practice. And then he acted like a little kid at Christmas, to where he'd be like, shh, and try to have people be quiet that noticed him. And then he just liked to sit behind Therese and Teicher and Matt Derrick and Herbie and see who would notice him. And then finally, whenever they didn't notice because they're busy watching practice, Dorsey'd be like, "Hey guys, that looks like a good football team out there." And then they turn around, and then just everybody laughing. So Dorsey had a good personality, and he was a likable guy. It just.
He would sometimes come to Mizzou games because Mizzou and had some good teams in 13, 14, stuff like that. And I remember we were sitting in the press box one day, and I wanted his opinion on E.J. Gaines, who was a cornerback at Mizzou and of course went on to play and still in the NFL, Kansas City kid. And so I sat up there, and Dorsey pulled out his scouting report and showed it to me. And he said, "Yeah, but you see that number right there?" And he pointed to a number on the line. I was like, "Yeah." And it was some sort of draft grade that they assigned, and it was a little inside baseball. It was proprietary to the Chiefs, probably.
I think it was probably height or arm length, because I know he's big on those too.
Well, but no, he pointed to something under height than arm length, and I said, and I it was like the grade evaluation and what they thought his his ceiling was for the NFL. So, and I said, yeah, but I said that particular number doesn't mean much to me. And he goes, means you can play in the league, but he can't play for us. And I said, oh, well, yeah, why is that? And then he pointed to height.
Yeah, I'm telling you,
because EJ Gaines wasn't tall enough, because he prized the taller corners like Sean Smith and guys like that he brought in during that era. But he was really, I always enjoyed sitting there talking to him, because he was a football junkie in a lot of respects.
He loved talking football.
And if you were just talking football, John was great.
Yeah, he was awesome in that regard. And that's where I'm saying, like, whenever he took, I feel like him, Ballard, Veach, and that whole scouting department took their draft to a new level in terms of how to identify in some regards, and how to have a certain baseline on numbers in that regard, to where Ballard uses that in Indianapolis like crazy, to where there's certain unique traits that Ballard wants. And if a guy's got a really distinct trait, Ballard will grade that a certain way compared to maybe some other NFL teams do. And I think just the marriage of having Dorsey and Veach and Ballard and Mike Paganzi and the whole scouting department that they had combined, I think a lot of those guys, they were able to kind of build their own type of system that it had some influence from Green Bay, from the Bears, and from the Philly style, and they combined it all together. And I think they Dorsey, when he made the final call on some draft picks, obviously some of them didn't work out, because I remember during the press conference, whenever the Paxton Lynch year, whenever the Chiefs ended up taking Chris Jones, I know there had been rumors that Paxton Lynch was maybe the quarterback they were identifying, and then Dorsey said in the press conference he wanted Miles Jack. And then they ended up trading out and taking Chris Ballard. Chris Jones.
Chris Jones, yeah.
So I think there's times the picks may have not. That one ended up working out with Chris Jones, obviously. And had he had Miles Jack, that potentially could have worked out too. But then there's been other times where, from a draft perspective, they burned some capital. And whenever it went to Veach and it became his responsibility, I think some of those mistakes and some of those errors caught up to him.
Speaking of Veach, what has fundamentally changed with the way the front office operates now? I know you're a pretty big fan of Veach, and we've talked a lot this offseason that look, you can go check everything back in February, March, before free agency started, and we were talking about what we would do, and you and I were in agreement. You don't sign Dee Ford long term.
No, not with those back problems.
And if you can afford to take the salary cap hit, like Barry and Houston, all those guys are gone. You and I both thought that was what they had to do, and said we don't expect any of those guys to be on the roster. So I know, at least from our assessment, the way that we viewed the team, Veach has made a lot of moves that we think were the right moves, that were savvy moves. I don't know that that's a universal sentiment, though. When among the Chiefs fan base, not that anything ever is among any fan base, but why is it that you, from your point of view, what do you see about Veach, either the way he evaluates talent or the way that he constructs a roster, that you think is good and is going to be more beneficial long term for the Chiefs compared to the Dorsey era?
I think with the Brett Veach approach, I think a part of it is that he's willing to be aggressive and he's willing to strike whenever he needs to whether it was to maybe get a Reggie Ragland at middle linebacker, to add in some rotational offensive line depth with Cameron Irving, or here's the thing that I know a lot of people don't like to give him credit for, but I mean, the organization's come out and said it. Terrence Paylor had a phenomenal article on it with Patrick's agents, so with Chris Cabot and Lee Steinberg involved in that. In the article, I believe, is having quotes in it. It's been put out publicly that Brett Veach was a big part of the reason Patrick Mahomes was here, that he was the one pushing to Andy Reid for it, and that he was going to Andy Reid, showing him this and telling him that he could be this guy. And how long has this organization waited for a franchise quarterback?
Look, I mean, I'm not going to tell everybody how old I was, but I was a young kid, too young to really remember them drafting Todd Blackledge. But I've known since Blackledge flamed out with the Chiefs, how big, how big that was, because, obviously the 83 draft class, the Chiefs were one of the few teams that didn't strike gold in that draft class. Yeah. And it's been beaten into my head ever since then that they never drafted a quarterback in the first round. They hadn't developed a quarterback that won another football game for them since a starting quarterback to win a game for the franchise since then. And so, I mean, I always just, when I got to like high school and college, I just looked at who the San Francisco 49ers backup was, and I just assumed eventually he'll be with us. So, I just kind of had to judge that because whether it was, I mean, I was really disappointed when Steve Young didn't finish, the twilight of his career with us because, I assumed that was going to happen after the Bono years and all that.
So I'm sorry to hear that for you.
No, it's been a rough one.
But I'm saying, like, people say, well, it was Dorsey's pick, Dorsey's call, he ended up doing it. And people say that was him, but I'm telling you, if Therese writes an article, you should strongly adhere to why he's writing that article and what he's putting out there. And the amount of work that Veach did behind the scenes to help convince people about Mahomes, because there's a lot of people throughout the league that thought he was a gunslinger and that his footwork couldn't be fixed and some of the other stuff, that it wasn't just going to work in the NFL. And Veach believed in that, and he worked hard to convince who he needed to. And with Andy, he had, you see the pairing now with Andy and Mahomes together and how hard Mahomes works and how good Andy is. Like, that's the perfect marriage of quarterback and head coach and offensive minds and how hard they work and their work ethics combined together. And it was just that was one of those things that I think Veach will not get the credit that he deserves on that one, but that's what's helped take this franchise to a whole new level. That's what got him to the AFC Championship at Arrowhead for the first time ever. Now, Dorsey helped build the foundation, and Veach was a part of that scouting department that helped build the foundation. Chris Ballard was a part of it that helped build the foundation, but you have to keep evolving. You have to keep getting better. And I think with Brett Veach, I think he tries to figure out ways to keep evolving and get better. And I think he also has a good, like we were talking about there with the transaction portion, with making the decision on Houston and Barry and making some of those tough decisions. I think he also knows when a player's value is getting ready to be done with, and that's why he moved on from D Ford and traded him now, so he could get a second round pick back, so that he could go make the play for Frank Clark, because he'd already obviously had that conversation. He said in his press conference that they'd had the conversation, knew what it was going to take to get him from Seattle, and then also whenever you go out and you do something to not only that magnitude, but you target certain players and you're willing to spend a certain amount of money and do cap structure in a way to where you have comfortable cap room and you have comfortable contracts, but you aren't, like you said, you aren't paying for the past. You're paying for them in that moment, in that prime.
Yeah, because, I mean, basically, if you look at the money, the way it works out, I mean, they're basically paying Frank Clark now the same amount they were going to be paying Justin Houston moving forward on the rest of his contract. Or
potentially D Ford, yeah.
And I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't think that in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, the best player among those three in the NFL is going to be Frank Clark, and it's going to be by a landslide. And so I think that's definitely that's the kind of thing that works in his favor. And I know people don't like the optics of, well, they traded a first round pick, and they only got a second round pick back for D Ford and stuff like that. But look, I mean, if they're picking in the top 40 next year, because they get the earlier of the San Francisco 49ers too. So if assuming San Francisco struggles again next year, then they probably get their natural one, which maybe as high as 33. Probably won't be, because Miami Dolphins are probably going to be way worse than them. But it could be as high as 34 to maybe 40, early 40s. I mean, you gave up what, pick 28? I mean, it's not like they gave up a top 10 pick to get and a second rounder next year for Frank Clark, and then turned around and only got a second rounder back for D Ford. So I think that I don't think that criticism that he didn't get back enough for D Ford and stuff like that. Look, I would have liked to see.
You need multiple bidders to make that happen. So when the Packers signed those 2 free agent pass rushers, you lost the other bidder that you had.
I was going to say, I don't think you had leverage in that situation.
No, you didn't.
And the only leverage you needed from Seattle, other than the fact that you were much more desperate than anybody else because you probably weren't going to get an elite pass rusher where you were sitting in the draft, which Seattle knew. The only other aspect there was you were going to have to pay Frank Clark on the back end. And so, but I'm guessing that there were more people willing to line up to pay a long-term contract to Frank Clark than there were for D Ford. And if you're going to make that trade, you have to think about the long-term deal. And so, I mean, look, if there's one criticism that I do have of Veach, and that I do think is somewhat valid, it's that I for whatever reason, he couldn't get the Bob Sutton change to happen a year earlier. But when you look at the draft, and Breland speaks, and some of the draft picks they made, it feels like they were anticipating a switch from a 3-4 to a 4-3. It feels very much like Brett Veach knew the writing was on the wall about this, and he was drafting guys that would be a fit in that system. And like you talked about, drafting guys with an eye toward who he was going to have to replace, not necessarily this year, but next year, or 2 year or 3 years down the road. And he was very much, it looks like, drafting for that 4-3. He was very much, it seems to me, looking at the players and the profile of the players, anticipating that. And maybe if he had pushed a little harder to get that defensive coordinator change done a year earlier, maybe last year has a different feeling. Maybe last year it doesn't come down to a coin flip in overtime or an offsides penalty on D Ford. Maybe if you had a different defensive coordinator, they could have got the pieces to work right, and that team could have gone on to the Super Bowl last year.
Well, I think part of it is that I think you didn't anticipate. I personally anticipated. For my season predictions, I was only one game off in my prediction in terms of what they ended up doing. I thought with Andy and Mahomes together and the unknown with the offense, I thought they could go out quick and they could make some noise and surprise some people. Now I thought they were going to lose the Steelers and they didn't, and I figured they'd lose the Patriots just because they're the Patriots and they have enough tape at that point. So I was curious to see the barometers of how Mahomes would do, and I think he surpassed a lot of expectations within the organization and in the fan base and in the media as well. And there's some ways they could have gone, but I from a draft perspective, Breland Speaks will end up seeing what happens there in terms of how he does with Brendan Daly as his D-line coach. I'm curious to see with that. Then we'll see what Derek Nottie is a strong individual. I think Dorian O'Daniel could do really well in their sub packages. I think he's got some speed to him. Armani Watts, I liked last year just because he had the range. He had some range to him, but he also had some lightning quick speed. And then we'll see. McKenzie has upside. We'll see what he does, and then we'll see what Tremont Smith does. And in the long grand scheme of it, what he's able to do by being coached by Dave Merritt and Sam Madison. I'm curious to see what these guys can do with, in my opinion, proper coaching.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm kind of curious about, and we'll see what this. I think the players that they were able to obtain this year in the draft, I think they're guys that could help make the necessary impacts where they need to. And where I think the difference is, in my opinion, between Veach and Dorsey is I think Veach has a plan. I think he knows where he wants to go with stuff, and I think he's already looking a year or two in advance what he may need to do cap-wise, what he may need to adjust here, what salary he may need to adjust to create some cap room here and there. And I think you see the wheels working quicker and before it becomes a problem, to where I don't think you would have had the same problem with with the Dorsey or with the Barry or Houston contracts. Like Dorsey waited until those final moments.
The Rashad Fenton pick, I think, is a perfect example of that. He's not a guy that a lot of people may necessarily were talking about, but he's a guy that projects as a possible nickel corner moving forward. And nickel corner is becoming an increasingly important position in the NFL.
Becoming more expensive,
becoming one that's being rewarded. You got Kendall Fuller sitting there now. You expect him to be the nickel corner and really, return to that. Slot. You expect him to return to that position, on a full-time basis. And obviously, you hope that he can replicate what he did with Washington when you got him in the Alex Smith trade to begin with. But if he doesn't, you've got a guy sitting there now in Rashad Fenton that you'll have a year to evaluate, a year to get up to speed on the system. And if you need to, prep to replace that guy. And you didn't wait until next year to draft a guy that's not going to be...
Or to overpay for somebody in free agency.
Yeah, but the other thing is, like, if Fenton or the other guys that you have can't get the job done there, if it was a miss, now okay, well, here's what we need to do. And now you can either move that up or down in terms of where you put it on your board in terms of its priority when you get into free agency next year before you get to the draft. And then okay, maybe if you miss in free agency and if you don't want to pay Kendall Fuller and if Rashad Fenton's not ready, well, now all of a sudden that cornerback has to be one of the top spots addressed in the draft. But they're at least getting the pieces in place where they're thinking along those lines rather than it almost felt like kind of shooting in the dark or kind of, the old school philosophy where they were just like, we're just going to take the best player available. And it's like, that's fine, as long as you understand where the pieces are going to be coming off your board, and you take that into consideration. Like we talked about, I'm not sure Dorsey always did a good job with that.
I think what Dorsey did is the pattern that I think I saw in the first round with him is he was replacing for a year in advance. So, like, Eric Fisher was to replace Brandon Albert. D Ford was meant to replace Tom Ali or Justin Houston, depending financially. Chris Jones was meant to potentially replace Don Terry Poe in some regard in terms of that defensive line. And I felt like it just they were trying. And Marcus Peters was meant to potentially financially replace Sean Smith. And Patrick Mahomes was financially meant to replace Alex Smith. So I think each year in the first round,
No one Tyler Bray.
huh?
He wasn't meant to replace Tyler Bray.
No. But I think they subscribe to a similar theory. What I think Veach does overall in his draft now, and the scouting department. But I think Dorsey only really went with it in the first round to try to financially replace something, rather than, like you said, in the first round maybe you take the best player possible on the board, and that's the guy, and they make an impact in a spot where you need it, versus just trying to specifically replace somebody you're probably going to move on from in free agency the following year.
All right, hey, we're going to come back and carry on the C Block tradition here on 4th and 1. Welcome back to 4th and 1. Hey, feel free to let us know whether you're when Nick tweets about the podcast this week. Just feel free to use either a Team Dorsey or a Team Beach hashtag.
You're gonna make it like Twilight apparently now.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Retweet for Veach, favorite for Dorsey. No, but hey, Nick, I think it's your week to lead off on Name That Chief. So
I think you should start, because I'm still searching mine right now.
Okay. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start us off here on Name That Chief. And I tried to tamp down the number of numerical references for you this week.
I wish you the best on that.
But
I'm probably still gonna not pay attention.
Yeah, you're already tuning me out, aren't you?
Yes. You said a number, and I was like, nope, not today.
All right, here we go.
Can you name that chief?
All right, here we go. This former star wide receiver was drafted by the Chiefs in the 4th round of the AFL draft and the Eagles in the 15th round of the NFL draft. He led the AFL in yards per reception in 1966 and also had the longest touchdown in the league that year. He then led the AFL in receiving touchdowns in 1967. After the merger, he led the NFL in receiving yards in 1971, one of 2 1,000-yard seasons in his career. Only Tony Gonzalez has more receiving yards and more receiving scores in a Chiefs uniform. He's tied with Travis Kelce for 5th in franchise history in total receptions. Nick Jacobs, can you name that Chief?
I'm going to go with Otis Taylor.
That is correct.
I just like the long pause that you have.
No, I was thinking about it, and I just, for the young fans in the audience, I want to make sure Otis Taylor, Hall of Fame guy, one of the all-time greats in the NFL, had a couple 1,000-yard seasons when 1,000-yard seasons just, were a lot more uncommon, and I just want to make sure, let's give some love to some of the older guys. I've done a lot from the generation that made me fall in love with the Chiefs, the Stephon Page and the Carlos Carsons, but I wanted to go back a little bit in Chiefs history here.
And I'm actually going back in Chiefs history as well.
Oh,
Name that chief.
All right.
Lindos. Stop. What have we talked about?
I'm sorry. I just get so excited.
Oh, man. All right. This former chief played for the organization from 1963 through 1974. He is a Pro Football Hall of Famer. He played linebacker and defensive end. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler.
Did we pick guys that Simone Awards are named after?
Actually,
on the same one?
I don't know. Maybe. He was a part of their Super Bowl team. Do you need any more at this point?
I was thinking Buck Buchanan.
And here's my final clue for you. I'm going to pretend I never heard you say that. This individual can take a quarter out of your hand before you even close it. And he does this to all the rookies whenever they have their rookie tradition, and he's done it to me before, and he's lightning quick at it. It's one of the coolest things you ever see in the world. And he keeps the quarter, too.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
This is just a play for him to steal quarters, then.
I mean, I'm still amazed it's worth it. It's worth it to see it. When you see a person, it's one of the coolest things you ever see. Because he still has the reflexes, because he's in his... he was born in 1940, and he still has the reflexes to be able to do this lightning quick, which he was so good on the football field. I can give you his number. He's in.
I
He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
no,
in
I'm just drawing a
1983.
blank on it. I had the two names.
Oh, I'll give you one more clue. You ready for one more clue?
Yeah.
He has the same last name of a tight end you asked me about last week.
Oh yeah, Bobby Bell.
No.
No, like I
Got
said,
it.
I was when as soon as you said linebacker, defensive end, I was like, well, it's either Bobby Bell or Buck Buchanan. And then as soon as I said Buck Buchanan, I could no longer think of Bobby Bell. But Bobby Bell, it's funny that you picked that because Bobby Bell is I believe the small class defensive player of the year gets the Bobby Bell award here in Kansas City. And the best wide receiver, the best pass catcher in high school every year gets the Otis Taylor award.
And somebody gets Buck Buchanan's too.
I think it's best
Right.
front seven player, lineman, for big class. I think that Buck Buchanan goes to the big class and Bobby Bell goes to the small class. But that's just funny that it's going to be really awkward. The week where we both pick the same player.
That's what I'm waiting on. So I'm gonna have to pivot that week. I'm gonna have to pivot that week.
All right,
All right, you ready for that?
that's right. Hey, let's wrap it up.
Check the tweets.
Look, I got to get back down to the desk.
All right. I get it. Stephen Floyd asked, who is your dark horse candidate to be the Chiefs' most productive rookie? And who from last year's team do you think takes the most step forward?
Step forward from last year. This is going to sound weird, but I actually think it's going to be Sammy Watkins just because
Okay.
If he can stay healthy and stay on the field and be a little bit more productive, I think that's going to make a big difference. Look, he seems to do a little bit better in odd years than even years, if I remember correctly. So maybe this is the year he makes that happen.
All right, this is going to be from.
Wait, hold on. As far as the rookies go, if Mecole Hardman ends up having a role on special teams, I think he could have a bigger impact, especially if he returns a couple touchdowns, turns the tide in some games with some big returns. If Traymon Smith and or Tyreek Hill, assuming he's still on the roster, which I think at this point we expect him to be, but if those guys continue to do most of the special teams duty, I've said it again, I'll say it, I think it's still going to be Juan Thornhill.
All right, Chiefs Jayhawks ask, what's your prediction for this regular season record?
Yeah, you know what? First of all, MIZ. Second of all, I have not looked at I just haven't looked at the schedule close enough to say
so then Todd can,
game by game. So let's say 10-6 with an asterisk that I reserve the right to change my pick later.
You could always tweet it later. David Morgan asked, with regards to Chris Jones, but also in general, do you think the Chiefs are going to adopt a philosophy similar to the Patriots where they tend to not dish out record contracts and rely on the coaching up the talent and scheme?
I think it's going to depend on player by player. I think that's always the case. I think that's been the case with New England for the most part. But I think that they do trust that they can get more out of their staff and trust in their ability to turn a guy like Trey Flowers, from just a guy into a guy who makes a lot of money in Detroit now. I still think that the Chiefs are going to pay big money to big players, if only because I still think that from Clark Hunt down, loyalty is a bigger part of what the Chiefs are and have always been and have always talked about than what you've seen from Bill Belichick, whose heart is made of probably like mechanical pieces.
No, I thought he was
Or a lump of coal.
I thought he was the guy. I thought he was the character they based off Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I can't remember the character's name.
Which
He was the king of the army, the ice army, the winter.
Oh, the Night King.
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry,
Well,
I've started to block out that show out of my head.
Yeah, 'cause the last season
frustrated me.
Yeah. So no,
I thought they based the character off Bill Belichick. They didn't.
See, no, I always the rumor I had always heard was that Bill Belichick's father was the Grinch, and that's why his heart was small and black. I don't know. Maybe that's not true though.
Steve Belichick was a saint. You can take that back right now.
Yeah, I don't.
And then our final one.
To Bill Belichick's dad, I don't know anything about you. That was just meant to be a joke.
Okay. Now with Lance, this is gonna be your final question specifically for you. It says,
Lance Bass?
No, I said Lance. Who was worse, Matt Castle or Elvis Grbac?
The answer is always Matt Castle. And you can look, mark this down. I have not liked Matt Castle from the day that he was brought in. I did not like the Matt Castle trade. I did not think that Matt Castle was a good quarterback. I got yelled at by other Chiefs fans for yelling at Matt Castle from the stands during that playoff game against Baltimore. I just didn't think he was a good football player. And hey, that's one football argument that Terez will always concede I got right.
All I can say is I apologize if Matt Castle, his family, or any of his former neighbors are listening, because some of his former neighbors like to tweet me and tell me what a great guy he was. So I apologize to him if they're listening right now.
And that's fair. And let me just finish this episode on this. One's ability to play football and whether I think you were proficient at it has no bearing on whether you were a good person or your character. I'm sure Matt Castle's a wonderful person. That doesn't change the fact that I think he was a terrible quarterback. That's as simple as that.
I just hope somebody can have that type of honesty with your kids if they play sports down the road.
Oh, trust me, I will, and I already have. I mean, you should ask my son what my opinion of his rec league basketball team was this winter.
No, it's probably not put that on the record for the other families to hear right now.
It was not good.
All right, well, thanks, Todd.
So I predict the Chiefs will win more games than the 0 my kids' rec league team did this summer. So how's that? Tweet that, Nick.
I was trying to help you to get out of it, but you still went for it anyway.
All right, well, say goodbye, Nick.
Bye, Todd.